All right, eighth graders, coming at you here with a video about how to angle evidence in your argument. The reason we try to angle our evidence is that when we just drop in a quote into a piece of argument writing, it's not enough to just let it stand by itself. We need to then elaborate and use our reasoning to explain why that evidence proves our point. Today in class, we did an activity where I gave students two different documents about this chemical called dihydrogen monoxide, or what was the other name for it? Hydrogen hydroxide, I believe it was. And so they looked at these articles, and as they were processing through them, they were trying to find different pieces of evidence that were really persuasive, and they were trying to determine whether they should be persuaded by these texts or not. It got to the end, and we debated whether or not this chemical, dihydrogen monoxide, should be banned, only to find out after a while that this chemical, this dangerous and deadly chemical, was actually water. The tricky thing that the authors of these texts had done is they took evidence that existed and angled it in a very, very drastic and specific way. They angled it so much that they were able to convince their audience that water, by a different name, dihydrogen monoxide, is actually bad, toxic, and should be banned from the United States and from use in everyday life. And so we started to see through that activity that we can take evidence and we can use it to serve our purposes. Now, that might sound kind of dishonest, perhaps, but if we're good argument writers, it's not that we're being dishonest. It's just that we're essentially taking advantage of the opportunity to use evidence in our favor. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish as we're becoming proficient argument writers. So a couple things I want to talk about here at the beginning on this slide. There are two bullet points. The first one says, you might find quotes that support exactly what you're trying to argue. Today in class with my second block, I talked about how this reminds me kind of like looking for socks in the morning. Sometimes it's really easy to find a pair of socks, right? You go into the drawer or into the closet, wherever, and you're searching, and then quickly you find two matching socks. That's like when you're going through a text and you find the exact piece of evidence that you're looking for. It fits perfectly, you're good to go. But other times, you might be looking for that sock and you just can't find it. And so you do the next best thing. You find a sock that is a similar match. Okay, it's not perfect, but it'll get the job done. It kind of looks the same, kind of feels the same. And so that's like what happens probably more often as we're writing an argument, is that we're trying to find evidence, but it might not be the perfect evidence. It might not be the perfect match. And so what we need to do is angle that evidence or phrase it in a way that's going to benefit our argument and not hurt us or be distracting. You also, down there at the bottom, it does say you don't want to just repeat in your reasoning. You don't want to repeat the evidence that you provided. You want to continue to elaborate on it. So let's keep looking at this. All right, we have a couple pieces of text evidence here. This would be if you were, if one of your ways to achieve actionable change was through leadership, like we talked about in class. From Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail, you might be looking for some evidence that proves that leadership is a good way to achieve actionable change. I think a lot of people would migrate towards something on the right-hand side. They would like this kind of a quote because it's long. All right, a lot of people like including big, long blocks of quotes in their writing. But the catch here, you guys, the catch is that when you include too much evidence, it actually hurts your argument. It doesn't help your argument. It hurts it, because your reader, they're looking more for what you have to say, how you're proving the point. Your reader might already have this text in front of them, and so they may not be persuaded by it. But you, as the debater, as the arguer in this situation, they want to hear what you have to say to prove how your evidence proves your point. So if you spend too much time, if you rely too heavily on your evidence, it's actually going to hurt your argument. Now, another thing that this just okay version on the right hand does is that it's a little bit too obvious. All right. I gave an example in class today, and it wasn't the perfect example, but I think it'll work for today. The example was you're having a debate with your friends, and you're trying to say, what is the best fast food chain? And one of your friends quickly says, oh, that's easy. It's McDonald's. And they provide a bunch of evidence. They say it's the biggest fast food chain in the world. What are you talking about? It was basically the first fast food chain. It's obviously the best. And your response is, oh, come on, I'm looking for something more complex than that. That's the obvious answer, but what's the next one? You're looking for them to give a response that's maybe out of the box. And so that's kind of what happens on the right-hand side is you come right out and say, Martin Luther King Jr. states that, or he uses leadership, and this is my evidence and this is my proof that he was a leader. Okay, well, you don't really have anything to elaborate on now. You've just been very, very clear and very obvious with the fact that, yes, he's a leader, and that's why leadership is a way to achieve actionable change, but you really don't leave yourself any room to explain why your evidence proves your point. It's just almost too obvious. Now look at the one on the left-hand side. It's much shorter, right? It's much more to the point. And that's what I like about this one. It says, I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. All right, so this one packs a punch because it uses some strong language still, talks about opposing forces, and it demonstrates, it paints this picture of MLK standing in between these two forces, pulling him back and forth. I have lots of opportunity here to explain why this shows that leadership is helpful. I can go on and on now about how good leaders don't always just go with the flow. Good leaders are people who sometimes have to make the difficult choices. They have to choose between one side and another side. They have to be the deciding factor. They have to be the one who stands up and their voice is louder than the majority. So I can spend a lot of time elaborating on that piece of evidence. On the right-hand side, all I have to go off is, yeah, MLK was a leader because he was literally a leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Now, the last thing I'll leave you with here is that it's important that we transition into our angling evidence. So here are some specific verbs we can use to angle our evidence. I should see this language in everybody's writing. There are 9 different ways that you can lead into your elaboration, and I should see this all over the place. Now, don't repeat yourself too often. Don't always say suggests. Don't always say illustrates. Make sure that you're bouncing around between multiple of these. Okay, now a couple things I wanted to also reference. I've posted the checklist for you on Classroom that you should be referencing as you go through your writing, as you're planning your writing. I've also posted the checklist for argument reading that you should be using to determine if your sources are credible or not. I've also posted the outline that you should be filling out as you go. This should be finished by class on Tuesday so that we can start drafting our writing. Now, if you're struggling to find enough evidence, you don't have to just use the Martin Luther King Jr. letter from Birmingham jail. You're welcome to use any other texts in that blue packet, as well as the texts from the weekend homework that I posted on Friday that was due today in class on Monday. You're welcome to go outside of those texts as well. I want you guys to be really, really good at proving your point. And so I provided you with some text options, but you don't have to limit yourself just to those. All right, please let me know if you have any questions tonight. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing your work tomorrow and drafting out your position papers. See you then.